Sandfall Interactive is an indie development team with some of its members being Ubisoft refugees. It was founded in 2020, and using a self-proclaimed co-ownership deal with the publisher Kepler Interactive and a composer whose works can be found primarily on Soundcloud, put out a little indie title by the name of Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, just last year. It's a turn-based RPG with stylistic inspirations found straight out of the late 18th and the early 19th century, gameplay mechanics reminiscent of a PS1 JRPG, and character interactions reminiscent of more recent RPGs, and an overall dark theme clashing with its often vibrant visuals. On paper, this game should not be good. I cannot stress this enough. It is an RPG with QTEs, the first official game from a French dev team, some of which have history with Ubisoft, a game company with a less than bad reputation, and music from someone on Soundcloud. 9. That's how many awards that Clair Obscur took home at the 2025 TGAs. These included Game of the Year and Best Score in Music. This, in turn, prompted me to finally bite the bullet and play the game I'd bought months prior. I've played enough famed games to know that popularity doesn't necessarily mean good, and relatively recently there's been some controversy in relation to alleged generative AI use for placeholder art, things meant to be replaced prior to the full release. I can't claim to be any kind of expert when it comes to AI, and I won't, but I will say that the use was evidently so minimal that the Steam store page for this game doesn't list AI as having been used. It's also important to note that the game director has stated that while the use of AI was a, quote, brief dalliance, unquote, its usage was closer to a test than anything else, apparently. This is a story that has been corroborated from various other interviews. At the absolute least, at current point of time, there appears to be no AI-created assets found within the game, but the mere possibility that they once did, much less that they did, albeit to a seemingly minimal degree, can put people off the title. It did remove them from their nominations for Indie Game Awards, after all. I'm not going to tell you if AI is good or bad, or where you should personally draw the line when it comes to its usage, although I will say that I don't think it's a fair assessment to call the game completely tainted media for dev choices made that had seemingly no lasting impact. Either way, a review of a video game by a 29-year-old who works at a grocery store is likely not the best place for a deep dive into the world of tech bros and RAM commandeering, but more than that, you can make your own choices. In any case, I'm sure you can forgive me for my general apprehension towards picking up my controller, and for those like me who weren't as willing to immediately dive into the popular for fear of wasted money or the regret that comes side by side with wasted time, I'm going to answer the question: is Clair Obscur Expedition 33 worth it? Let's start with the obvious out of the way. The gameplay is turn-based, and the turn order that you can track on screen is determined primarily by speed, barring specific combat encounters that have unique mechanics. The big crux of this, however, is that almost every interaction you can do in combat has an associated quick-time event, and these QTEs also lend themselves to the game's parry system. Yeah, that's right, this turn-based game has parrying, and dodging, and jumping, and different kinds of countering depending on what's going on at any given moment. Jumping is probably the easiest to do since there's a symbol that actually appears on screen to inform you of your potential impending doom. Dodging is easier than parrying, but you can't counter if you dodge, which you can do if you manage to parry everything thrown your way during an enemy's turn. There's another kind of counter, gradient counters, introduced during the second act that, like jumping, works for specific attacks only. The basics are simple, the complications arrive with timing, and god does it feel good when you can pull off a fully parried boss fight. Then there's the characters in your party that each have their own specific mechanics. I'm going to skip spoilers for this video because this game is good, and also I don't want to spend another 2 hours talking about things, spoiler alert, so instead I'm just going to talk about the 4 that show up on the store page with the logo. Gustav has a prosthetic arm that gets charged up when certain actions are taken, and his skills can add or expend these charges to grant more powerful versions of that skill or give additional effects. Lune features something called elemental stains, a resource based on what skills she uses. Every skill she has generates a stain of some kind to a maximum of 4 stains. Generally the stain is dependent on the skill itself. A fire skill creates a fire stain, and skills can consume currently active stains, often stains that wouldn't have already been generated by the skill in question for extra effects. Mael has 4 stances that she can switch between with skill usage: stanceless, offensive, defensive, and virtuose. Each stance, save for stanceless, imparts some bonuses and effects on Mael, and can grant additional effects for skills based on what stance is active when you use them. The key to her is constantly switching between stances, since you can't retain a stance for more than one turn, barring one skill that specifically allows you to do so. Ciel uses tarot cards and builds up sun and moon charges, as well as a special effect dubbed Foretell on enemies. Foretell can reach 10 stacks normally and are applied through skills. Foretell is then consumed by other skills to impart additional effects, typically extra damage. She can also enter Twilight, wherein the stacks of Foretell can instead reach 20 when she has both sun and moon charges active. Rather than have your typical mana or magic system, the resource that allows you to use skills is called AP, action points, and it's generally built up with basic attacks. There are other ways to build it up as the game goes on, and you gain more pictos, and the most powerful skills tend to use the maximum amount of AP available, that being 9. An interesting mechanic that the game has is that Picto system, which vaguely reminds me of Tales of Vesperia. Each character can equip up to 3 Pictos, and can swap them freely outside of combat. The cool part is that each Picto has both an attribute bonus and a passive effect tied to them, and you can unlock this passive effect by engaging in 4 different combat encounters while that Picto is equipped. These passive effects, called Luminas, can be equipped by using Lumina points, and the cost in Lumina points is relative to the Lumina itself. If you master the Lumina from a Picto, every character can use that from then on, and there are no restrictions apart from the point cost and the inability to equip a Lumina that you already have access to via a currently equipped Picto. What pleasantly surprised me, apart from the nostalgic flashback to my youth of playing Legend of Dragoon with the Prima strategy guide in my lap, was the music. It's something of a rule of mine to purchase the soundtracks and art books, normally digitally, of the games I talk about on this channel, but very rarely do those make it into any playlists with any amount of longevity. Yeah, a song here or there to Xanarkand and Regal Ancestor Spirit being staple examples, but the majority of a game's soundtrack are much more rare to find me listening to on my walks to and from work. The music in this game is an exception. It is insane to me that they found their composer when Lorient to start through random circumstance. He was a guitar teacher who happened to upload some of his work to Soundcloud in an obscure French webpage, where he was then discovered by the game's director, and I'm gonna be honest, they were extremely lucky to do so. The music and the visuals in this game are a feast for the senses, and even if you don't want to play the game, I am going to recommend the music here regardless, because it deserves that recognition.
Guess we found 68's boat.
There's a path through the boat.
That anchor doesn't look man-made. Storm is coming.
Lumiere is a city with a troubled people. The world was thrown into chaos when 67 years ago the fracture tore the world apart, launching the city into the ocean and leaving in the distance a monolith and a giant woman, the Paintress. And with their arrival, so too came the Gamage, numbers etched into the monolith guaranteeing anyone of that age or more crumbles into roses on the day their number is up. Granted, this wasn't its name just yet, as the effects of the Gamage wouldn't be truly felt until some time later, when more and more orphanages sprang up with less and less adults to care for them. This has resulted in expeditions, treks from Lumiere to the continent, that seek to put an end to the Paintress and return some sense of normalcy, free of the ever-looming threat the Gamage poses. This game, as you'd guess based on the setting premise, can get dark. There have been dozens of expeditions prior to the one that this game follows, and you will see and hear about them as the game progresses. I appreciate that while it doesn't often go into the details of how a society could or would function in a world where everyone has a theoretically guaranteed death day, it doesn't strictly speaking pull its punches either. There are times when you might forget the kind of game this is, and then get pulled back into what this world really is. Everyone in it has to grapple with loss. regardless of who they are. No one wants to explain to a child what death is before they can really understand it, but when they and everyone their age hears and sees it every year on the same day, year after year, the people of Lumiere are fighting a seemingly hopeless battle, and that leaves them how they are. Drunkards who can't so much as look at their own children because it reminds them too much of the missing parent. Orphans dressing up as creatures because playing make-believe is an easier thing to hope for. A blind father making an expedition outfit for his son, who wishes to be a future expeditioner, on the night before his own gamage. The arguments of what one can define as a legacy of everyone will be assuredly dead regardless, and whether or not having a child should be something done in a world where most everyone is simply waiting to die. The fear of the end overtaking everything. Fear muddling reason until only desperation remains. Ship after ship and life after life sent to the continent, all attempts to stop it. This year, Expedition 33 is different, or so its members claim. This expedition has Gustav and his Lumina converter, something no expedition before had. Coupling that with Lune's studies, allowing for a trek similar to that of the first expedition, the only expedition with any survivors, and this year may have the best chance of finally putting an end to the gamage and freeing Lumiere of its ticking clock. And beside these two are CL and Mael. After the unfortunate arrival of Expedition 33, the main continent shows itself as being both a stunning place and a dangerous one. And the only thing that defines 33 as being different from most other expeditions is that Lumina converter. While the game doesn't outright explain this, the Lumina converter is the in-lore explanation of the game's Pictos and Lumina mechanic, a reason that the characters are getting significantly stronger outside of it just being, this is a game and that's just how games work. But it also opens up one of the issues I do have with the game. A lot of what you can learn about the game world you have to learn for yourself through inclination and assumption, and other things aren't given even vague explanations. As a whole, I'm generally fine with this, but it can still be frustrating when a character talks about something that's super important, but you have no context for it and will never get context for it. It's still a good experience in my opinion because the characters are aware of what these things are and won't just spout out context, unlike some streaming services I could name like it's an easily executed reference masquerading as a joke. This is unless, of course, something isn't working how they think it should. Lune mentions that the bodies they find on the continent are different from the deceased of Lumiere and theorizes it has something to do with the Nevrons, but she doesn't go into a spiel of how Chroma is supposed to work or what Nevrons could possibly do to warrant the Chroma acting this way. Gestrals are real things that exist that you encounter pretty early on, despite the orphaned children from earlier asking a character if they were real enough for the children to join them. This suggests that Lumiere has some shared history with the continent, but after being flung into the ocean with the fracture, certain aspects of that history have been lost to myth, and in turn makes one wonder what other myths are more fact than fiction. In general, yes, I would say this is good, but it does have one, I guess not a problem per se. Let's call it a missed opportunity. The night before the expedition launches, Gustav receives a journal from his apprentices to document all of his findings and his treks in general so that the residents of Lumiere can read it upon the expedition's hoped return. You can write in this journal sometimes at camp by choosing that option when you interact with a campfire. That said, at no point does this game have a glossary of the expedition's findings, no bestiary, nothing at all. The game does have a journal in the menu, but this is specifically for the audio logs that you find that previous expeditions left behind. It's a massive missed opportunity, in my opinion. Especially given how artistically driven the game is and how curious some of these characters are in exploring the continent. And speaking of the characters, I like them. I think the attempted social camp system that gets properly introduced in Act 2 is a bit bare bones, but the view into their ideals and goals is good. Everyone here feels the loss of the gamage in different ways, and the influence of the end is a constant weight. Again, not getting too specific here, spoilers are where the really thoughtful stuff comes up, but I will add that the actors are giving some great performances here. I mean, you can't really go wrong with Shadowheart and Gollum, right? There are two endings chosen at the end, and you have to start a new game or go into New Game Plus to see the other ending, and honestly, I'm tempted. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a good game, if a bit clunky with its platforming sometimes, and potentially controversial due to extremely early development decisions. The implementation of QuickTime events harkens back to a nostalgic title from 26 years ago with a better story in my opinion to match. I can pretty easily recommend it, but most especially the music, because it is that good. I'll be getting back to my regularly scheduled programming with the next video on whatever I happen to choose, probably Abiotic Factor or Pillars of Eternity. I'll see you later. Story out.